Emma. I am a graphic designer and an illustrator, and I do 15 million other things too, as I think a lot of artists do. So when they ask, like, why do you do what you do? I thought I'd take you on a little journey about how I got to where I am now, which is what I'm workshopping as like change art, or maybe like change graphics, something along those lines. So maybe at the end, if you have an idea or some feedback about if that's working, once I've explained what it is, let me know. This is my dad and I. I grew up in a family of artists in rural Nova Scotia. My dad built a log cabin in the woods, no running water, no heat. I had deer literally as my friends. It was very idyllic. He was a potter, a calligrapher, beautiful calligrapher, painter, average cartoonist. My stepmom is a painter still. My mom took up painting when she was 40. So I decided not to do any art at all. And I went to school for diplomacy. I wanted to be kind of like a Jane Bond, go around the world, solve the problems, get into politics, kind of like dive into like the nitty-gritty problems of the world and generally save everything. So I went to U of T, which is here on the slide. And that was great. I think I lasted about 2 years before I had a total nervous breakdown. And depending on who you ask, I was kicked out or quit. And I went to Humber for art school, which I didn't have a portfolio for at the time, but I had been crying on my couch a lot, and my boyfriend at the time threw like a college calendar at me and was like, just pick something. So I figured, if my dad was an artist, I could probably be an artist too. And so I somehow convinced them to let me into the program with a portfolio that I had thrown together with no training whatsoever. And after the program had closed too, so I had to go into his office and be like, let me in. And I started doing like graphics. I did not know how to draw. I was doing stuff in pen and ink with like a light table balanced on my knees and like tracing stuff over and over and over again. But despite the fact that I had like very little training and no skill, I ended up in magazines and doing stuff for my artist friends, so like comedians, other artists, who else? Musicians. Yeah, I eventually got a job doing accessories, and that actually went well. And I was headhunted into an accessories or an apparel company, which within the first 6 weeks had me in India here, on the ground by myself, approving the artwork that I was now creating for this multi-million-dollar company. So this was my first exposure to the impacts of things that I was creating in a very material and physical way. And that was when I started to get really involved in like things like sustainability and my personal impact on the world. And while I was there, I was forced into using a tablet and learned how to draw a little bit better from a book. So you can see here, there's like really cute like kid stuff, which I still do to this day, and it's great, and I love it. And some adult stuff, a little bit more like figurative, so I was like developing my style, but also being very traumatized on a regular basis about like what this $1 trillion industry is like doing to the world on a social and environmental level. So during this time, I started doing more freelance work, getting contacts outside of the apparel world. I did stuff for TVO, for election stuff. I started getting into like some political things a little bit, trying to mesh the two worlds together, but it wasn't really working out. I was still heavily immersed, and at this point, probably for about 15 years in the apparel industry. So I left, had an existential crisis, started my own production company, and started doing like photography, meshing together that aspect with like musicians and clothing designers who are independent. And that was with a friend of mine, Rich, who's that guy with the ladies there, and me. And that was great. I did it for a year, but I was still finding that there was like a piece missing between my initial aspirations and what I was doing now. So existential crisis, and I moved to Bali, and I became a yoga teacher because that's what you do. So I lived on the beach for a while, didn't wear shoes for a couple years, decided I would never draw again, and instead I was just gonna like meditate and teach people how to move. I have a background as a dancer as well, so this kind of worked out really well. It took about 3 months, I think, before I started drawing again. I really couldn't quit it. And that took me very much by surprise. And so I ended up doing a lot of freelance work. I had an agent. So I'm like balancing my laptop in these like weird Balinese huts or on a beach in Thailand during like a yoga retreat and like creating like octopi with sunglasses, for example, or stuff for kids or greeting cards. And so this was kind of like filling this gap that I didn't know even existed, which was a desire to create and make art in like a very visual way. So that was problematic because, you know, I had sworn it off. So I came back to Toronto, gathered up my best friend who had just broken up with his girlfriend and moved back from Australia, so was having a similar kind of turmoil in his life, and we drove across Canada to Vancouver. I had come to visit it and realized that there was palm trees and mountains and ocean here, and that seemed really good, and I didn't realize that. I was quite mad that nobody had told me, because Ontario. So yeah, I moved here and I started doing more freelance work. I worked for the Canucks for a while as a designer. I started doing a few infographics. I was getting flown back to Toronto to do graphic work and artwork. But I was just kind of like making it all kind of work in a way that I wasn't still clear on what I was doing. But because I had started doing these infographics, a friend of mine who worked at the CBC saw them, and he actually asked me to do a few more. So there they are. I started doing all these infographics, which ended up teaching me a lot about the subject matter, of course, but also how to interweave like science and information and communication and knowledge transfer to an audience. And so that felt really good, and I started doing more and more and more of them. And I realized that this was bringing me closer to the two things that I wanted to do, which was change the world, like I had originally started out doing, and make art. So I went back to school and did a master's degree in environmental communication and education. Ended up with a supervisor who is the UN champion of the earth for science and innovation, and started doing graphics like this one. We were just recently in Malmo in Sweden about complex ideas translated into simple graphics to change the world. She runs a school that's nomadic and international, and we run like 7-day-long fellowships to teach people how to activate their personal agency. I also started teaching at an academy here, which is for students who want to become fashion designers. So I teach them how to create textile art on fabric, and then also how to design sustainable fashion lines. So we have a whole program around that. Social impact campaigns, how to do it. We partner up with like local businesses. ReFood, I think, was the last one, which they distribute like 2,000 meals a day to people in need. And it's great. And then, so these are some of the graphics I've been doing lately, which are, like I said, about translating complex ideas that further social and environmental change in a positive way. So some stuff about brain chemistry, transferring problems to other parts of the world, like sustainable systems around us. We did this project about superheroes, so like activating everybody's own personal superhero powers and what you can do in the world to activate change in the sphere of influence that's directly around you. And then other stuff like, if you're really into like systems thinking, then systems flow diagrams, and that's really like the academic master's part creeping into this. So yeah, that's what I've come around to. I'm now using artwork as a way to communicate the ways that everybody can make positive change in the world, either socially or environmentally. And I'm tentatively calling it change graphics, but let me know what you think.